I'm your host, Phil. And today I'm joined by Katrina Kennedy. We're going to be talking about the topic of reflection. Now, the first thing I want to ask you, Katrina, is as I was looking more on your website and learning more about you, it references that you're an expert in L&D. Now, L&D is learning and development, if I've got that correct. But I want to just put it out there that facilitation has many niches. And I've referenced this in the podcast before of I think people can interact with the work that we might do in facilitating learning in so many different ways. And L&D is one of those ways, a subset of that. So I'd love if you could first describe to the listeners what your definition of learning and development would be. What do you consider that as a niche within this realm of facilitation?
You said there weren't going to be any tough questions. That's really
I
funny.
know.
So learning and development, has really evolved to include everything and anything, I think, related to how we help people perform on the job. I think training is tucked in there. I think facilitation is tucked in there. I think coaching has a huge piece of that. We can't talk about those without talking about instructional design, and we could go on from there. But I think the distinction that I like to make and the distinction that I use for me professionally is that I am a trainer and I use a facilitative approach. And so I am helping people to be able to perform the things they need to perform in the workplace, but that works best when we involve them in a really active way rather than leaning on lecture, rather than leaning on give any of the methods that don't really honor someone as the adult that they are.
It's interesting because there are so many different terms that people use. I also am listed as a trainer, and I list myself as a trainer because I work predominantly with educators in school-based systems, but I'm teaching educators how to facilitate in a more effective manner. It's the experiential education is the umbrella I intend to use, but I often have to define what that means to people. It's not as like if I said I'm a trainer, people assume I'm a gym trainer. I'm in a gym. And so sometimes they might look at me and like, well, okay, you're not as buff as I would imagine a trainer might be. And I'm thinking, oh, no, education. So it's like that. How do I train people to educate? So it's like those kind of lenses. And I appreciate you framing learning and development because as I consider people listening to this, I don't want them to think like, what does that mean? But I think what you said is from the workspace, how do they perform their jobs effectively and how do you teach those people how to do those things? So it's filling in the gaps for learning and the development from an employee perspective and how do you do your jobs appropriately. Is that correct? Rather than education in the way that I might enter it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we have moved to this place that we forget that people don't magically know how to do a job that they've never been in before.
Yeah.
And supporting them in a variety of ways is important. So it is different than education if we're thinking about going to school, because that bottom line is that they've got to do the job. The business wants them to do the job, and most people want to be able to do their jobs.
And it's nice that you talk about like how do we make effective learning? Like how do we treat them like the adults they are, but also understand that learning differences that exist out there and how do we ultimately make the transferability of what we're trying to give, that knowledge, how do we make that as accessible as possible? Which kind of leads us into your book, Learning That Lasts, and then the real topic of reflection. So I'm going to ask the first thing here is, like I had you define learning and development. From your perspective, how would you define reflection?
This one is one that I love. So reflection for me is about looking back and retrieving our experiences and then deciding what action am I going to take moving forward. And reflection for me really is reliant on that moving forward, that action-based piece. Otherwise, we are simply ruminating or we're just being nostalgic. So it's very action oriented.
My guess is you've got clear distinction why the word reflection was used. Just like we're talking about facilitating, educating, training. I've heard reflection termed so many different ways. Evaluation, debriefing is another term that I get heard a lot. You've chosen the word reflection, and I'm guessing that's an active choice. Why the word reflection for you?
It was a very active choice because I think debriefing, evaluation, all of those are about looking back to move forward. So I see reflection as encompassing all of them. And I feel like it's also a word that people can relate to. If I had come up with a different word, or if I had picked a more academic word, I think it would not be as accessible. And what I was really trying to do with the book is be accessible to those people who are, feet on the ground in front of a room, virtually or in person, that are doing the work that they need to have stick. They need to have that easy thing that they can put into place and see an immediate impact.
And I think that the term reflection often makes me think of a mirror, of course, the reflection image you're looking in it and is looking inward at yourselves. How do you take that reflection? My guess is that there are ways that you describe this in the book, but how do you make that reflection an action? How do you not make it just a, "Oh, like, I reflected on it, good, but I'm not moving forward"? Is there any active process to take from reflection to action?
Absolutely. I often talk about and share it in the book that it's kind of two pieces. We have retrieval, which is the part of that our brain needs, that part of learning where we go back and say, well, what did I just experience? And look at what I experienced, recall that, pull that to the front of mind, and then add to that second piece, which I call reflection. But the two really fit together where we ask the question, now what? What am I going to do with this? And it's that now what question in whatever form we ask it that is the most important in order for it to truly be reflection. Even if we look in a mirror, if I can take this analogy someplace maybe weird, we'll see. But when we look in a mirror, you look in a mirror for a purpose, and then when you see something in the mirror, you usually do something about it. There aren't a lot of us that just wander around looking at ourselves in the mirror for the sake of like seeing our image. I know that exists, but we look in the mirror and, we adjust our hair, we apply makeup, we take an action as a result of that looking.
I like that a lot, and I'm thinking of like the times that I've caught my daughter just like we've got a mirror at the top of our stairs, and I'll catch her just like, What are you doing?" And then it's just like I'm doing something, like there is an action to it. It's not just the act of like her just looking at herself. And me asking the question obviously is not helpful because that just highlights the level of embarrassment. But
Absolutely. And, as a good dad, that's part of your process, right? You've got to highlight that embarrassment. But I think too, like for a young person, they're still figuring out who they are. So they're looking at this changing body. So there is an action. They're just not, I don't think they're aware of it yet.
can I maybe ask you like a story? This is a story about about potentially yourself here. But you're focused on reflection. You've obviously been drawn to the fact that this is maybe when it's missing, there is obviously not as effective learning. Can you imagine it like yourself leading programming maybe 20 years ago, and you so now, if you were to reflect on your growth, what were you missing then that you're more active now that you could give advice to a younger facilitator and say like, skip some of that and get to this? Like, obviously, reflection is important, but what were you doing wrong, and maybe what are you doing now?
20 years ago. And I knew as soon as you asked the question, I knew the answer because I could take you to exactly where I was standing when I had this realization that 20 years ago, standing in front of a room of people and moving them through a process or training them how to do something, I really focused on who I was and like looking good and having the right words and the right clothes and the right everything. And I stood in front of the room 20 years ago and literally had this moment of, oh my gosh, this is not about me. And in that moment, I feel like everything shifted. And so just that mindset that everything I am doing is about the person who I am there to support. And so that changes everything. That changes the way I ask questions. That changes what I actually do. I think I do less work than I did 20 years ago. And, that's a little double edged, but, and I'll tell groups that like my job here is to do as little work as possible because when you leave, you have to do the work and you're going to be measured on whether or not you can do that work. So, how good I look in front of the room, how great you feel this experience is really irrelevant. because you need to leave with a skill, you need to leave with some knowledge, you might need to leave with a different you absolutely need to leave with a different behavior. And so that's my focus, and that is truly, truly, I think, how I have shifted in since that moment 20 years ago. It actually may have been 22 years ago. It was right before I became a mom, so
There is something about becoming a parent and that changing your facilitation that I'm noticing in a lot of people who have, like, had kids, especially from my perspective as coming from a school-based education and teaching educators. I used to think that I knew how to work with kids when I didn't have kids, and then I had a kid, and then I was like, "Okay, now I
yeah.
understand. Now I sorta get it." I wonder, like, there's 2 parts that I wanna highlight. One, I appreciate you saying the focus was on yourself because I reflect on, like, myself. I reflect on, like, new, facilitators, new educators coming in, and I put a little pressure on those people who are maybe also presenting and teaching, like yourself potentially, of saying that I think it's important that we model the vulnerability or highlight, like, yeah, I'm making it easier now and I'm not doing those things because reflect back on a young 20-year-old me and going and seeing, let's say I go to a conference and seeing someone present and being enamored by their presentation style and not and looking at their style and not necessarily the substance of what they're teaching and being like, how do I be like them? So I would model myself after that person in that 90-minute window that I saw them in and not really going deeper and going into that substantive, what was they saying? How were they saying it? And those kind of skills. So I think that's the first point of acknowledgement of saying like, I appreciate you saying that. And then the second thing I was thinking about was in terms of you saying like that development and now you're doing less. I also find that I'm doing less. And sometimes I think that that can be an uncomfortable position to be in. I sometimes think like when someone is hiring me to do something and me acknowledging I'm doing less and now older and I'm earning more, like there feels like like this oxymoron of like maybe I should be working harder. But I think that there's a uncomfortability of doing less. I find when I'm working with an audience. I was recently in a conversation with someone from India, and they were talking about facilitation cannot be taught, and because there is an uncomfortability that is required of you doing experience and realizing if I talk less, that's okay. Because I feel like if I talk more, I'm valued more. What's your thought on like the amount that you, as a facilitator, talks versus doesn't talk, or lets the group talk and you talk less? Like, how has your development over that comfort been, and where are you now? Like, how much are you talking in front of a group?
So, I am talking less, I am pausing a lot more. I am allowing people to have the space to ask me questions that get them to the place they need to be. And I think it is absolutely something that you can learn. I feel really strongly about that. And I think it takes, going back again to that place of who is doing the work here to change behavior or to gather knowledge, and that doesn't happen through you listening to me. So I'm present, I'm creating a space, I am monitoring that space. And I think if we look at it from from a business perspective, you mentioned like, the client is paying you. They're paying you not for those 90 minutes or 6 hours, whatever it might be, that you're with the group. They're also paying you for the wealth of experience and knowledge that you bring and the time that you have prepared to have that space and have that time that the group is doing the work, because that does take preparation, that does take thoughtfulness. I don't go into a room and go, okay, I'm just going to like tell them to do two things and I'm going to sit quietly. It's a very active quiet. It's a very active silence where you're taking things in and you're measuring, when do I step in? What do I add? How do I maneuver this environment in the way that's most effective for the group? That's a very active mental process. And I really find if you listen, if you really pay attention when you are talking the most, there are moments when the room is really engaged with you and what you're saying has value. And then there are moments when you're talking maybe for the sake of a story that goes on too long or the sake of sharing some like amazing insight you had as a facilitator and you can see the room disconnect. That's something that, I think that's like an advanced facilitation skill. I think that's not something that happens easily. But I think I can feel when that shift happens, and it's important to really step back and go, why am I saying this? Why am I sharing the words? And do they have the value the group wants at this moment? I would much rather have someone in the room raise their hand or just, have that look about them and go, oh my gosh, I just realized this, and have this moment of deep understanding and deep reflection about their experience than me telling them what their experience should have been. There's no value in that. Like if I have to say to you, hey, Phil, this is what you just experienced and this is the value, like, nah, that's like, I think about, when my son was a teenager, he didn't want to be told what the lessons were. He needed to figure them out himself. And I think adults aren't really that different.
No, no, absolutely not. In fact, knowing that because I work with a lot of adults, I'd say it's more so. um,
Right, right.
yeah, I think it's a bit of like the assumption that adults know stuff is sometimes can be a mistake. I see that sometimes with newer facilitators coming in and assuming that they'll come to the realizations without the prompting or the suggestion or the activity that might lead it. We assume an obvious. Maybe that's something that like how do you resolve the consideration is when you're reflecting about assuming where something will lead and go and being more comfortable with letting the experience change the flow because the adaptation in facilitation can be the part that I find is uncomfortable for people. The planning on I'm going to lead this activity, the reflection will be this, and we'll talk about this. They give this framework, but we know that that's not the framework. You're going to do something, and something probably different is going to come from it. Is your advice the active listening, or is there other things that they could do maybe to prep themselves for the unknown?
That's a great question. I think that it's helpful to know what you're supposed to be getting out of a situation or a facilitation. If it's really training based and I need people to be able to do three things and they need to be able to know three things, then I'm going to want to have a little more control over it. Then I'm going to do a little bit more suggesting. But if it is more behavioral motivation, personally based, where you're going to discover what you need to discover for you, I'm not going to guide it as much. And as a facilitator, I would suggest facilitators realize the distinction between needing to go down path A and then having the freedom and flexibility to go down path B. I also think there is huge opportunity to have people reflect as a group when you want them to have a similar outcome. And so they share their experiences together and then decide the action together. And so you begin to have some of that filtering that can happen. And then I benefit from your view and may see an opportunity that I hadn't without having that interaction.
I want to highlight something you said prior to this as well, in terms of the way I'm thinking about the development of someone in facilitating reflection, is that maybe at the start they would have spoken more, and in the process where groups are reflecting, maybe they would have moved over to their bag or their agenda and planned for the next thing, and they weren't active in the listening. And so the development of a facilitator is that point of where your structure or maybe your agenda has got to a point where you can attend to the participants more in the reflection moments rather than just giving them prompts. And that can guide the next level of reflection. And then the next level, maybe, as you reference, is reflecting on how people are responding to the way you're talking too. So there's kind of like these multi-layers of this development. Solo reflection, partner reflection, group reflection. What is your I don't want to say go to or favorite because I just assume that it will be dependent. But what do you see value in one versus the other? Where might there be value in those? And I've just referenced that for a while, I've got more open to this, but for a while I was not doing the large report outs as you suggested there because I was experiencing report out fatigue. I just felt like I was doing it for the wrong reasons. And that's the piece you're referencing. Don't do it just for the sake of it. But if you think there would be value in other people hearing the viewpoints of what was discussed, then do it. But I think I was seeing it used just carte blanche. Like every single time someone would be like in partner conversation. All right, back to a large group. Let's talk about what we talked about. It's like they just talked about it. Do we need to hear it twice? Like, so there's different things. Where's the value in each of those?
Gosh, that's such a great question. I'm just imagining, doing this virtually and sending everybody to the breakout room, and they spend like 15 minutes in the breakout room. They come back, and then you spend like another 30 minutes hearing what
Exactly.
happened in the breakout room. It's like nobody wants to hear that. Like,
No.
we talk about engagement, like let's talk about things that disengage. So I am leaning a lot more into individual reflection. And the reason I'm doing that is think we are forgetting how to take that deep moment to think. And I have never had someone be given time who has said, I don't want to take this time to reflect. Even if they're doing nothing, you're not turning in your reflection. I don't need to like grade it. So even if those 2, 3, 4 minutes, whatever we take, I'm a fan of breaking it up over the course of a course or of a facilitation. So even if they sit and do nothing, there's still value. And the people who choose to use that time will get great value out of it. Just that moment to pause. I think we pause so seldom today. Everything is moving so quickly. Or we ask chat GPT to answer, to tell us what we're thinking. Those couple of minutes are just so valuable. So really leaning in to individual reflection. I like shared or paired reflection when there's something at stake for the pair that is sharing. So if, they're going back into the workplace together, if they're going to, when the stakes are a little higher, they might be working with a customer, they might be working in an environment where they're with someone else. And then, like I said, for the group, I'm going there when there may be some disconnect between how people are moving forward, or if it's simply a program that they're going to do over time. I'm thinking about an emerging leader program or a leadership program where hearing each other's perspective in that setting helps you build some cohesion. So it does really come down to depend, but each of them definitely has a use and a point, I think, that we consider. And I guess that's really in the long-winded answer. The short version of that is really consider your group and the outcome that you're trying to get.
Yeah. And I also have been individually leaning towards the solo reflection more in recent months or even years, because you're absolutely right. It's like there's just not the opportunity to sit and ponder. And I've had that question of like, well, what if they're not answering the question you gave them to answer? And I'm like, it doesn't matter to me. I think that's that taking the facilitator role and just being like, it's okay. Like if they sat there and doodled, wow, that's like super reflective. So,
Right.
yeah, exactly. So finding the value and the why. The next thing is like we've focused on like the why and maybe a format, but now this is a question I get a lot when it comes to reflection is like, when do I reflect? Do I reflect at the end of every activity? Do I reflect at the end of the program? Do I reflect intersperse? Like, when do you choose of when is the right time to just make a decision to reflect on something? Or do you believe that you reflect on everything? Like, what's your thoughts?
That's it. I use the idea of before, during, and after, because I want to start off with thinking about, I call it preflection. What am
I
I
like that. I'm writing that down. Everyone listen,
well, and if
pre-flexion. Yeah, that's a good one.
no,
Anytime someone
and
can speak of that, that's when I light up.
I love it. I love it. Like it's the idea of like if you look at the root of the word, it's literally like bending before. So we're you're kind of warming up. So you're thinking about, what do I want out of this experience? And when we ask people to come up with that for themselves, it's more powerful than reading them 5 objectives. It's more powerful than telling them what they're going to get. And now it's mutually beneficial because I may actually ask you for your preflection. So I know, like, this is what you want. That also then sets us up for a stronger reflection in the middle and the end because we can come back to it. And when I say in the middle, I'm going to choose the most important points that I want people to remember and add it doesn't have to be a long time. It can be something as short as like, a minute, write down something quick that you want to recall. And then at the end, or not at the exact end because it's too much like now we're leaving, so I'm not even gonna really invest. But closer to the end, spending ideally, 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how long your program is, where we're really looking back at our preflection, we're looking at the midway reflection as well to then really set the action so that we're really deciding here's what I'm going to do after so that we get the most value out of the time together. And I think too, as a facilitator, you can use reflection in those moments when you see that the group might be a little restless. They might just need something different or something really powerful and unexpected has happened. Those can be points to just drop in a quick reflection. I think many skilled facilitators already do this where they see something happen and let's just pause for a moment and and talk about what you just experienced or what it was the value for you in that experience. So yes, a lot of it.
Yeah, and I wonder if, well, you preflection, you've got during, you've got the reflection. My assumption is that doesn't end there, right? And when they leave the room, there'll be follow up afterwards. And may I just coin the term post-flexion? But what do you do in the follow up? Like, what does that look like? When after a program do you reconnect with a group if you aren't intending to reach them? And again, I'm assuming it's a follow up email, or what does it look like on the post?
Yeah, so for me, it looks a couple of different ways. I'm doing a different method now than I was a year ago. But for me, it's an email and maybe a series of emails, depending on the program, depending on the length of the program. And the email will just highlight a couple of things that we experience and then ask a couple of questions. And I may get a response to those, I may not. My favorite method, though, is I call it in the book, it's called It's a Wrap, which is the reflection action plan. So RAP, it's a wrap. And in that, at the end of that document they complete, it says, when do you want Katrina to follow up with you? And what would you like to talk to her about? And so people are telling me when they want to follow up. And that particular activity has been the most successful for me when people have the agency to follow up. And then I put it on my calendar and I often will go through and I'm going to let a secret out. I will set them all up. I will schedule them all at once. So then they magically go out when they're supposed to.
Yes.
But it's still a connection, and we know that when the facilitator connects with someone after class, that is one of the most impactful ways of encouraging behavior change over time. And so with that, what I'm using now is a program called Actionable from Chris Taylor, and at the end of my programs, people set a commitment. And with that commitment, it's a very small commitment, very small thing that they're going to do. They also are able to say, I want a notification by text. I want a notification by email. And this is how often I want to be notified. And then I'm able to follow their commitments and I'm able to message them. Typically, I message about once a week and check in, and I'll do that for 30 days after a program. And then I'm also able to see, because they're rating their progress on their commitment, I'm able to see their progression over time. And it's really amazing to see people change their behavior and then acknowledge that having that support over those 30 days is really one of the elements that helps them be successful. They also get the choice of journaling along that path.
Yeah.
So it's really like adding a reflection in a very, very structured way after a program.
I'm liking this a lot because for me, I think the struggle point is like I'll always, I'll email after, but it's just that I have very little response. So I'm not seeing what you're seeing in what you're suggesting there. It's almost like you're getting to actually see the trees that you planted, whereas I'm planting trees and I'm not seeing them grow. So I think that there is that connection point is like important. I actually did a workshop called Connection is Reflection, and I'm reflecting to that. Like, connection truly is the reflective portion. Unless we spend the
Yeah.
time to connect, how can we truly reflect with people that we're interacting with? Otherwise, it feels just this like I'm there for a moment and then I'm gone, right? So you have to try to keep that line flowing really well.
Yeah, it took me a long time in my business to get to a place where I'm creating this kind of ongoing connection. I was like you, Phil, planting a lot of trees and not seeing it. I did create a community. It's called the Let's Learn Together community during COVID, and reached out to people who had been in programs with me in the past. And that community, we meet once a month on the first Friday of the month. And that community is still going and has been a way that I get to see the connection, or I get to see, continue the connection, and then get that feedback on what's working for people.
Well, hopefully, like people who are listening to this have been like, I've been enamored with the conversation in reflection. I'd love if you wouldn't share, if you'd be able to share like the structure of your book. Like if people were to get it, right, you've got 45 activities in this book. Like how is it structured? What would the reader get out of it? We've talked some, larger topics on reflection, but what's the specifics?
Cool. So there are 10 chapters. The first two chapters are chapter one is what is reflection? So it really dives into the difference between reflection, retrieval, rumination, nostalgia. And then the second chapter is all about how to add reflection. So those questions about beginning, middle, and end, those questions about how to ask a question. I had someone just last week say to me that she had always asked her questions as a buffet. Like, I'm going to give you all these options that you get to choose from. And she didn't realize that people are more likely to answer a question. It's easier on your cognitive load if you give fewer choices. In fact, really don't give choice. Like, just give them a question, not this or that, and then change it all around. So that's the first half of the first part of the book. It's not the half. The second part of the book is 8 chapters based on 8 outcomes. So you would think about the outcome that you want to achieve, and then you can go to that chapter and find the activity that works for your time, your audience, and each of the activities is broken down. So you can see if it's a short activity, if it's a long activity, if it's a big group activity, if it's a single activity. And in the back of the book, there is a wildly large table that you can look at that like helps you sort all of that out. But I find it easiest to think about the outcome, go to that chapter. And I tell people, I don't want you to read the book. I want you to use the book, because I think it would be kind of, dare I say, boring to read chapters 3 through the end, because it's just activity after activity, including like what to say in the activity, modifications for the activity. So it's a book that I really want to see people use. Read chapters 1 and 2, and then use the rest.
As someone who's also written a book on activities, I can attest to that exact same thought of like this. As I'm writing it, like, I don't know if this is exciting anymore. Like each one is like a new activity. It's like, don't read it from cover to cover. It would not serve you in any way. So yes, I love like you've got like for some people that table will be so incredibly helpful, and for others it's like I don't need it, but like I love that you added that, even as you're saying that, like all of the ways to categorize. That's categorization actually of activities I find interesting, because I think that sometimes they don't think of the outcome, and they think of like number of people and props needed and all that kind of stuff, and I think outcome is probably the most important categorization of an activity. Like what am I getting out of it? Forget some of the other stuff. If you know what your why is, then you can fill in the rest.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is why I set it up with those 8 outcomes by chapter. And they're more or less in order. But, anytime you categorize something, someone who has, a little skill can look at one that may have landed, in motivation to learn and go, you know what, I can tweak that. And that can be, self insight that I can't even remember the categories now. you think I would.
It's okay. But it also describes to me the person who wrote this book has a large understanding of like the using activities, right? Like I think that the categorization is very helpful for beginners, but as you get more experience, you realize that a lot of activities can meet lots of different outcomes. But you need that in yourselves when you're first learning. Like it would be struggling for you to say like all activities could be used for in all ways. That's obviously not good for a learner.
No, not at all. And that was really one of my main goals with this book. I train trainers. That is where I spend most of my time. And I train people who are subject matter experts who have very little knowledge of learning and development. And so I wanted this to be a book that they could pick up and it literally gives them the words. But it also is a book that if you are skilled like you, Phil, you could pick it up and you might see an activity that you're familiar with, and you might see an activity that's new. And in that activity description, there are ways that you can take it to the next level. There are things that you can alter to make it really fit your comfort level, your skill level. So they say you're supposed to think of someone when you write the book. So I thought of that beginning facilitator or trainer, but I also wanted it there to be a little something for anyone who is in the learning and development field.
Well, that's awesome, and thank you so much for putting it out there, Katrina. As I've interacted with lots of different activity books and lots of books out there in the world of facilitation, I think one of the things that has often been lacking is the reflection component of it. So, thank you for adding this to the literature that exists for new and advanced facilitators to also find benefit in. So, thank you.
You are welcome.